So we're back. We're starting something new today. Reward for side canyon. To really enjoy it. So this, well, I wasn't sure where it was. I got this, I think it was a present a couple years ago, maybe Kovo. And I realized I don't think I'd ever gone being unfortunate, but the last sort of couple books we had just really awful layouts. But either way, you tried to do it. I think the other ones we had were all right before then. Okay. Okay, but it's I'm still using the broken stand by the replacement that I ordered did come in, but it's sort of a lot larger than I was expecting. Well, I suppose I'll go ahead and read it. I was thinking I'd just skip through, but a fantasy and science fiction films in the 70s and 80s, or are a fan of those films now, you most certainly have seen the work of Ron Cobb brought to life on the screen, probably without realizing it. Certainly a huge influence on me in my formative years as a fledgling filmmaker. And it was one of my great pleasures to have been able to work with him and to realize on screen so many of his designs. Personal journey with Ron was from fan internet, so finding and collecting fantasy and science fiction art was done the hard way. I used my allowance, hard-earned, mowing the lawn and doing the dishes, to buy books and magazines at our simply cover by Frank Frazetta or a paperback with a cover by Berkey or Freyas, and I'd be obsessed for the next week or so, drawing and painting my own versions, riffing off of their singular styles. This is how I taught myself to draw and paint. Exploded. Two movies thundered into the science fiction landscape, Star Wars and Alien. First blew my mind with the possibilities of design and set me on the path. Second starkly demonstrated what the experience of a movie could be when you really felt like you were there. The aftermath of these films, books of their design art were published, and in them I discovered Ron Cobb. Some of certain images was after Alien. That name stuck. At the time, I was fiercely designing my own sci-fi movie with the grandiose intention of somehow inspiring some. Inspire that confidence in Mr. Nobody was to draw and paint that epic in advance. In excruciating detail, Ron's designs inspired me at that critical seminal moment in my own creative journey. Outrageous fantasy. His designs for vehicles and spacecraft, spacesuits and props made sense to my eye in a way no other artist at the time did. He was a fantasist, worked as a mechanic, and a precision machinist. I knew my tech, and his stuff looked like it would work. Nobody at that time, or even today, could even remotely predict what a faster-than-light starship in the distance, driven by principles of engineering and ergonomics, emerging from familiar technology of today. How the sleek, sterilized as Star Trek, a myriad space design that did God knows what, but looked like they did something important, if not vital to the task of piloting a spaceship. Thanks to Ron, we all learned an important lesson. In a Hawaiian shirt, standing on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, he would be alien, beamed in from another universe, but in the corridors and machinery rooms of the Nostromo, fit right in. A fantasy narrative, but it is alien that was a milestone in the creation of a palpable, inhabitable, believable future reality. Ron's designs made it seem utterly real, touchable, with a bit of shadowy lighting, and with onto the brim of Harry Dean's cap, we were there. And it was that, a moment later, when the alien itself emerged from the darkness, it scared the holy living shit out. Some of us still haven't recovered. This is the paradigm. This film was another seismic influence on me and the filmmakers coming up at the time. Again, a fantastic future was made tactile and physically real. In which years after Alien came out, I found myself working at Roger Corman's New World Pictures, the most influential of the ultra-low budget B movie. that's close. And of course, I looked to Ron Cobb for inspiration. His books, along with those of Hans Ruedi Geiger, designer of the alien itself, were close and at hand on my shelf in the art department. Bear in mind, on the Terminator, we had no money for coffee, let alone designs. I drew it all up myself again. Ron's books were always close at hand. And then I managed to parlay my success from that film into getting hired for the first time. I had healthy design budgets, so of course my first call was to Ron Cobb, and finally I got to meet the guy who'd been a huge influence all those years. As nonstop, taking everything utterly seriously, as if the fate of the free world depending on getting the design absolutely correct. Yet doing it with all the warmth and humor, Ron were well known to readers of underground comics and free press. I only realized that much later. His humor and cartoon silence crept into aliens in the form of the nose art, the big boot of the crew's mascot, thrived on. My collaboration with Ron was very pragmatic, and there's no ego. Sometimes, uh, I don't know, I don't believe it coming from how much of I don't know. I don't really like. It's very pan-glossy, this sort of rendition of film history. Oh no. Ron Cobb, a name you may have heard of in the audio commentary of a film you grew up loving or listed in pages of a making of book. Or maybe it rings no bells at all. Its name, immediately recognized or not, is synonymous with impact of past during your lifetime. Not Ron. Well, I suppose I think that depends on your point of view. Win the MTV Music Award, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. His infectious personality out of the box, yet still overly pragmatic design philosophy left a resonant effect, influencing a great many people. was John Carpenter's directorial debut. The inception of the film began in 1978 when Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon were both students at USC. While the film was produced between 70 and 70-minute student project, blossomed into a 5-year journey and the true start of Ron Cobb's filmic career. Bannon and Cobb were old acquaintances whose mutual love of film brought them together many years before. O'Bannon, from reaching out with a desperate cry for help, tried to reach Cobb to get him to design the whole film, but he was unreachable. For weeks his phone rang without an answer, and then it was disconnected. Then I got his new unlisted number, but it was invariably a nice, simple little spaceship or a simple little movie. After finally getting a hold of Cobb, O'Bannon brought him to USC to showcase what he and Carpenter had already shot. When I first saw Dan's footage that he had put together, all the live look of the sets, which was the part of the film which impressed me the most, I couldn't believe it was a student film. I don't know. Since O'Bannon was handling a number of visual effects shots in the film, he had originally attempted to design the exterior of the ship. When Cobb got fog, one night around 10 p.m., Carpenter and I drove over to Westwood and roused him out of his sound sleep. I felt kind of guilty. I had to have those designs. We took him over to an all-night, a 3D plan of our spaceship. It was wonderful. A little surfboard-shaped star cruiser with a flat bottom for atmospheric landings. Very technological looking, very high-class stuff. Took it away, and model builder Greg Jean built it to spec. Encyclopedic magazine called it one of the most amazing out of all motion picture spaceships. There are plenty of fantastical, iconic, cinematic locations we fantasize stepping into, which contains something that appeals to our imagination, a deep-rooted wish. I've never wanted to visit there. On the surface, it's a desert stopover. I mean, I know that is the place. I've never understood the appeal. Stopover with rudimentary architecture, but beneath the exterior is a gritty underbelly, taking us on their race. To bring those ideas to life, George Lucas employed several concept artists to help him visualize the worlds of Star Wars, sketching creatures, scenes, and locations from the ever-changing scripts. Casually known as the Hammerhead alien, was a silent but heavily featured character in the Cantina. Gregory Nava, an Academy Award-winning writer, director, and longtime friend of Cobb, says the design was based on real science. Alron's designs for Star Wars are a very real base. Like how would a character breathe, or how their metabolism would work. He would go on about all these fabulous aliens. A source book called Galaxy Guide 1, A New Hope. He's portrayed as a sympathetic alien who had been exiled from his home for revealing agricultural secrets to the Empire, which was doing in an attempt to save his planet, Ithor. Bruce would later pretty impressive, considering Ron's design for the Hammerhead saw less than 5 minutes of screen time. And it doesn't stop with MoMA. The Star Wars looks like you're getting out of left field there with aside from conceptualizing the Ithorian race, Cobb's design Madden and the Cantina scene as a twin-horned, hairy humanoid prattling on in alien language, Antarian. The character went unnamed for 40 years until behind the scenes of the Cantina panel at the Star Wars. Other Godel characters in the Cantina, Felt, Pern, Trevig, and Hennet Kane, which reused the same mask and prop claws that were used for Cobb. In addition of the Godels were added to its design and fabricating a mask from it. Interestingly enough, the claws had originally been crafted by world-renowned Rick Baker for the film It's Alive, but were later modified by Liska for Star Wars to it as ambulatory plant. something that, according to Ron's description and the art, trap and absorb insect-like creatures, while also being the best joke tellers in the galaxy to be translated into a costume at the time. The term Revenant wasn't applied to the creatures until '91, when a miniature was crafted based on the design and used in the Cantina sequence. It was featured in the 1979 edition of The Art of Star Wars, and later showed up in the Art of Star Wars Classic Characters 1998 calendar, but never made an appearance in the films. To this day, the creatures C-3PO and R2-D2 in a cave where Cobb's creature hands them a bowl of cereal. Yeah, I didn't think he would be. The world of Star Wars is expansive. To say, we only see a handful of drawings where the subjects live on, they grow, inspire, they become so much more than a whim of imagination and a heavy pen stroke. Just ask Luke Skywalker himself, your incomparable imagination. They have both seen their share of failed projects along the way, including Jodorowsky's Dune. O'Bannon had something brewing, a script he had been toiling away on. And the title of the film was, as you guessed it, Alien. According to art director Roger Christian, Ron was hired on by O'Bannon before the film was ever greenlit. From the start, the script was very much in flux. We're still finessing the script. Dan cited it as an intensively creative period, where all that mattered was building the world in a meaningful way. Convincing the time, say not credited for the work on stuff. Okay. Christian continues, through Dan's persuasion, the producers finally agreed, but his hiring was on a along with Cobb, artist Chris Foss had been hired to help conceptualize the alien world into reality. In the beginning, we were constantly moved around to different areas on the lot. They had us in a washroom for a bit, and finally ended up in 5 months. Chris and Ron cranked out an obscene amount of artwork while Dan supervised and the producers continued their search. The producers eventually landed Ridley Scott, who helmed the picture, and production moved to 9, brilliant visualizer of the genre, with whom he had worked on Dark Star. Cobb seemed to have realistic visions of the far and near future. I quickly decided he would take on a very important part in making. Scott wanted Geiger to focus on the alien elements, while Cobb and Foss would conceptualize the human elements of the film. That didn't stop Cobb from taking a stab at Cobb's exploration of the temple featured Mayan-like hieroglyphs that depicted an insect-like creature prone on its back as another creature bursts its midsection above the bisected creature. Only scrap due to budget and time constraints. Cobb also did early passes on the planet, which closely mirrored O'Bannon's early script prose as more reddish, as more turbulent. Although Bannon was a fan of Cobb's take on the aliens, Scott felt they were lacking what only Geiger was able to provide, a tactile, nightmarish quality. The rejection, which happened early in the prose, was endlessly frustrated because he could design aliens without number, and they were all convincing and all unique and all starting to look at. His designs just weren't as bizarre or as bubbling up from the subconscious as the stuff Geiger. While Geiger's busy drumming up the stuff nightmares, Voss and Cobb focused their attention on the Nostromo. Aesthetically, the ship needed to exude functionality and plausibility. As a 22nd century should have been a bit too much. I grew up with a deep fascination for astronomy, astrophysics, and most of all, aerospace flight. My design approach has always been that of a frustrated engineer, as well as writer, when it came to authenticity, tangibility. My method for designing the Nostromo interiors was to emulate the engineering of the entire landing shuttle as though it were absolutely real, right down to the fuel, radiation shielding, whatever. So I was not supposed to be spending any time delivering exterior designs from my all-encompassing technique. I did lots more fantastical ideas. It pressured us a lot into bending the technology to have a somewhat similar look to Star Wars, said Cobb. Sort of half believable but highly stylized, or perhaps a better word, with a genuine projection of what a spaceship of the future might look like, or a combination of all of them. The theory was to give Alien more of a horror look, but I never personally agreed with that. I didn't have as all these different things he was doing were coming out so well that I decided to take a crack at the derelict spaceship. But when I asked him to come up with an irrational shape, he got very disturbed. He couldn't handle that. He kept on coming. With Cobb's design philosophy was Cobb's insistence that every detail on the ship be accounted for: how doors opened, where screws went, how the pistons pumped. This difference of ideology and push for anything to communicate that idea, and a concession was made to leave it behind. I would have liked to see it covered with space barnacles or space seaweed, all clogged and choked up. That was illogical as well. In Color Vision, Cobb dismissed the people involved in the film had never made one before. They didn't understand what they were getting into. Were put off by concepts like no sand in space and all the gravitational effects. Supervising model maker Bill Parson, Lander, who wanted a contrast between the smooth underside of the heat shield and the detailed upper surface. However, this was not to be. Our instruction was to encrust the whole craft. When it came down, we weren't seeing a craft come. He had wonderful background histories about his designs. Ron Cobb's love of realism was more than the musings of a frustrated engineer or frustrated architect. As a grounding element of originality, I found the more realism you put into it, the more original they look. As the time you don't do that, you covered the walls with drawings, and slowly but surely Alien emerged. With deadlines hastily approaching, the choice of which Chris Voss exterior had yet to be chosen, this mounting pressure to build the Lars Nostromo model went into the deserted art department and out of frustration grabbed all of Voss's designs off the wall and took them to Bray Studios. There he would choose the design himself in order to have enough time to build it. Yellow. We found the color a bit garish and had it repainted gray. Aside from A, some of Cobb's interiors were an almost exact replication from sketch to screen. Nostromo wouldn't become. Cobb inspired O'Mano to give the aliens acidic blood, coined the namesake Weyland-Yutani alongside John Molo, conceptualized all the corporate insignias and emblems in hopes of full content, explained Cobb. Science fiction films offer golden opportunities to throw in scraps of information that suggest enormous changes in the world. United with the Japanese have taken over the building of spaceships the same way they now have with cars and supertankers. In coming up with a strange company name, I thought of British Leyland and Toyota. The company would be called Weyland-Yutani in the following movies, with the D added sometime during Aliens by Cobb for an unspecified reason. The inception of the company's insignia relied on a blend of both typography and Egyptian elements. I thought it would be fun to develop a logo using the W and Y interlocking. It was already set on using the Egyptian winged motif. We tried some combinations, but they didn't really work. Weyland-Yutani now appears on the beer can, underwear, and some other stationery. The logo is present. Crew members all wear blue Weyland-Yutani wing emblems on their chests except for Kane and Dallas, most likely used to denote his place as captain. To watch the process all the way through, even some of the set designs. I was pleased with the things I had a fair amount of control over. Draftsmen and other people would occasionally design a set that would turn out very, very well. It's a mixed bag of many styles and many approaches. Knowing to Cobb, his design for Alien would forever influence the science fiction genre. This on the last movie I worked, because it involves spaceships, and the director of the brilliant clearly said I want it to look like a spaceship we haven't seen before. Now that meant designing a spaceship that didn't look like a Cobb spaceship. Because Cobb in Dark Star, and then the designs he did for Alien, especially the Nostromo, you can see how he influenced the way spaceships looked for decades to come. Because they're all practically engineered. He understood the forces. Why are these people walking around when they're on Earth? The only real substitute for artificial gravity is centrifugal force, so I keyed off of that. Then I went into things that didn't exist when he was designing spaceships, like inflatable computer, and he designs it in a way where you get exactly what you need and solve the basic engineering. When you wind up with stuff that's very much more like Gaudi in space. Wrong for doing the other work and for doing it so well that it's now become overused. I was working on this spaceship, and every time I'd give a young designer a problem, they'd come up with something that looked like Cobb's work, and I'd say, as much as I love this, you know, in the standard. Nobody even knew it was all his stuff. Okay, I was wondering if we were actually going to get to see the and here. We might be back on with this, or we might be back to Morkborg.